History is written by those in power. Like many African Americans whose stories are preserved, Robert Frazier's life is remembered because of his interactions with the white community. His life exemplifies the faithful Negro narrative. This narrative suggests that segregation must not have been too bad in the local community. Otherwise, why would a person of African descent interact and identify with the white community? However, this narrative fails to consider the necessity of employment to survive, and the only jobs available to African Americans at the time were service work, which required long hours and low wages, work similar to that performed when African Americans were enslaved. Robert's story is no exception. The Agricultural and Mechanical College of Alabama, the name for Auburn University at that time, was off limits to those in the African American community unless you had a service job on campus, such as a cook, custodian, groundskeeper, or some other service work. For Robert, he maintained equipment for the university's athletic programs. George Petrie was already a part of the college's athletic program when he decided to form the first football team in 1892. Petrie arranged for the first football game to be played against Georgia. Rumor had it that Georgia was going to come to the game with an old, blind African American as a mascot. Not to be undone, Petrie called on Robert Frazier, who was readily available as an equipment worker, to be Auburn's mascot. However, when game day arrived, Georgia showed up with a goat as a mascot rather than a person. Auburn stuck with Bob Sponsor. Unfortunately, Auburn's decision to keep Robert as their mascot draws similar parallels to probate records only a few decades prior, when people of African descent and livestock were comparable. Auburn prevailed on a muddy football field that day in 1892 and defeated Georgia 10-0. Robert continued his role as mascot, cheerleader, trainer, and equipment worker, work that would encompass 4 positions today. Robert's hard work for the college's football team for the next 28 years won over the affection of the white community, as portrayed in a newspaper article at his passing. The article states, "Most of the Auburn students for the last 25 years have regarded Bob as their friend, and he will be greatly missed when the football season opens again next fall." We do not know how Robert was perceived by the African American community. African American history tends to be an oral tradition, stemming from the prohibition of literacy for enslaved people. However, we do know that another African American Auburn cheerleader many years later, who was beloved by the white community, Hodge Drake, was not seen favorably by the African American community, and was considered by some to be a clown for the white population. We do know, based on Robert Frazier's headstone, that he was a member of the Mosaic Templars of America, a black benevolent society that helped care for the sick and poor African American population, suggesting that he may have been seen more positively than his cheerleading counterpart, Hodge Drake.